Hello and welcome back to the Young Just Us podcast. My name is Roman and I'm doing an issue-by-issue deep dive into the 1998 run of DC Comics' Young Justice. We have finally arrived at issue 1, 4 episodes into the podcast, and if that doesn't tell you everything about the way comics are published, I don't know what will. I love this issue, it's very fun and funny, so I hope you guys enjoy the episode. The first issue of Young Justice is titled Young Just Us and was published on July 15th, 1998. So just a week after the second issue of JLA World Without Grown-Ups. The issue was written by Peter David, penciled by Todd Nauck, inked by Larry Stucker, colored by Jason Wright, lettered by Ken Lopez, and edited by Eder Braganza. Panel separations were done by Art Studio Digital Chameleon. Todd Nauck, Larry Stucker, and Patrick Martin contributed to the cover art, which I will be displaying on screen in the YouTube version of this episode right now, but if you're just listening, don't worry because I will describe it. Robin, Superboy, and Impulse are front and center, Robin grappling, Superboy flying, and Impulse running. Robin and Superboy look quite serious, but Impulse has fries and a drink in hand, looking startled. They're in the JLA headquarters with the JLA meeting table in the background, littered with snacks and spills, though the boys seem to be leaving, evidently to save the day. At the top is the tagline, "They're not JLA Junior, they're ... and then the title Young Justice below that. All three boys have their hero names displayed in their respective brand-appropriate fonts. This cover is pretty iconic to me, just because I look at it so often for the podcast, and I also go back to this book quite frequently just out of nostalgia. I think the names on the cover is quite unique to Young Justice. I haven't seen it on issue 1 of any other team-up book. Maybe DC was concerned that people wouldn't know who was featuring, considering it was kind of one of the first next-gen hero teams now that the Teen Titans had finally grown up, of course only to be dragged back to adolescence by the need to concurrently release comics with the 2003 animated series. The synopsis of this comic on DC Universe Infinite reads, Superboy, Impulse, and Robin are all having a campout at the old Justice League headquarters when they accidentally awaken the comatose Red Tornado. After a brief conversation, they get a message that comes through on the monitor, leading the trio to uncover their first villain in the super cycle. Very true, all very true. I am going to get into the comic now, so feel free to read along with me, or just listen, or you can see select panels that I've pulled in the YouTube version. The comic opens with a sequence of nightmares. First up is Robin. In his nightmare, his hand has been eaten by killer cockroaches and replaced with a batarang. Nightmare Batman advises Robin not to worry because no one will notice, and also asks if Robin has ever considered growing a beard. Next up is Superboy, who has sprouted flaming wings in his nightmare, while Nightmare Superman tells him that this was inevitable because Superboy is so holier than thou. In Impulse's nightmare, his physical form as well as personality is changing too fast for him to keep up with. So these nightmares immediately signal the tone of the book, comedic, youthful, wacky, while also establishing our three main heroes and even inviting the reader to psychoanalyze them a little, as Red Tornado will also do in a few pages. I'm going to try my hand at it here, but I'd love to know other people's thoughts on these nightmares, especially anyone who is a dream expert. So Robin's nightmare seems to be about loss of identity. A symbol of his hero identity, a batarang, replaces one of his literal physical appendages, while Batman does nothing to help him. Because becoming Robin wasn't something Tim necessarily felt drawn to, rather he sort of pushed his way into the role out of obligation, it makes sense to me that he would fear the Robin identity overtaking that of Tim Drake. There's also the element of growing up or puberty, with Batman mentioning growing a beard. Perhaps Tim feels lacking or behind in his presentation of masculinity compared to his peers. Superboy, meanwhile, fears judgment, ostracization, and being seen as other. I think signaling his insecurity about being a clone, made to replace someone rather than be his own person. I think the idea of being a literal science experiment also bothers him quite a bit. We'll see this in later issues, but being stuck at the equivalent of 16 years old forever, assumedly, certainly separates him from his friends or anyone else his age, cuts him off from essential life experiences and the possibilities of maturing into adulthood. Impulse's dream illustrates his fear of his rapid aging coming back and the loss of identity that would cause in him. I imagine aging so quickly is like puberty on steroids, being out of control of your own body and not knowing where or how your personality fits in. In the nightmare, we see him in a suit as an adult, a mutant version of him, and also in reverse flash colors, perhaps indicating his fear of ending up like his maternal grandfather, Eobard Thawne, a villain. Bart doesn't know his place in the world currently or what awaits him in the future, being a literal man out of time, separated from his entire immediate family, although Wally is technically his first cousin once removed, but you know. So I really like the book opening up with a nightmare sequence because maybe I'm exposing myself here, but I really feel that fear is a very young and particularly teenage emotional experience. So much of my teenagehood was spent afraid of myself, of other people, of peers, of adults, of celebrities I looked up to, of new experiences, the future, the past, everything. Everything was scary to me. That out of control thing I mentioned before is really potent because as a kid, you kind of feel like everything will be exactly as it is then forever. It's really hard for a child to imagine change in any real meaningful way, I think, and then you hit puberty and it's like, oh, actually everything will change drastically all the time forever. You learn that actually it's the opposite of what you thought and change is the only inherent constant in life. And that is so incredibly terrifying. So yeah, I like seeing teen heroes be afraid, even if it's in a silly little nightmare sequence, because I think it reaches something very emotionally true about the experience of being young. Continuing from the nightmares, all three boys jolt awake, having had a sleepover in the Happy Harbor JLA headquarters. Robin turns on the lantern and asks if the other two had bad dreams, who both brush off the implication and pretend they didn't. Superboy says, No problems, Rob, I was fine. And then one of my favorite Bart jokes happens, which was also this week's episode teaser. Be sure to follow the pod on social media, by the way. Bart goes, slept like a log, and Superboy's like, logs don't sleep. And Bart replies, oh yeah, ever see one walking around? Very funny. Robin, however, earnestly admits to his own nightmare, and describing it to the other boys, he says, I had this bizarre nightmare. It was as if I'd lost control of my life. I was turning into someone unrecognizable, grim, gritty, depressing, as if some maniacal power was doing terrible things to me just to serve some demented whim. Impulse rolls his eyes at Robin's seriousness and says that while he was in favor of forming this team, it's boring so far and they need some action. So I believe we're following directly from the end of JLA World Without Grown-Ups, like this is the literal night after they beat Bedlam, which is some cool continuity. It's really sweet that Tim doesn't clock that Superboy and Impulse are lying about having had nightmares and just like honestly tells them about his. I really like it when Tim sort of refuses to participate in that posturing stuff, which I think is part of why he and Superboy can't get along at first. They just aren't communicating on the same social wavelength. Tim's Robin identity is very much a job to him. Like, he goes to work and keeps it very separate from his civilian life, while Superboy literally doesn't have a civilian life. Superboy is it for him, so I think he really clings to that, and part of it becomes this performance of masculinity for him. He was made to be Superman, after all, the literal Man of Steel. So although he's accepted that he can be separate from Superman and have his own identity as Superboy, I think the idea or implication of the reason he was created still weighs quite heavily on him and comes out in odd moments like this where he refuses to show weakness, particularly in front of other men or boys. Didn't really mean for the psychoanalysis to continue, but I guess that's just where we are today. Anyway, yeah, Bart's joke is so funny and makes me laugh every time. Robin's description of his nightmare, I believe, is either supposed to be a description of adulthood or like a meta fourth wall breaking reference of like, the writers are doing things to me for their own sick entertainment. I think it's that, actually. I think it's that. One of many fourth wall breaks in this comic, by the way. And this is the first instance in Young Justice of Bart's thought bubbles. He had a couple in JLA World Without Grown-Ups, though not in Young Justice The Secret, interestingly. I'm thinking of making a thread on the Twitter of all of Bart's thought bubbles from Young Justice, but we'll see. Anyway, this one is him thinking of a screw and a baseball to represent that he thinks Robin is being a screwball. Sometimes these are a little obscure or hard to understand, so I'm going to do my best to explain them to the best of my ability when they come up. The next page's caption says, "Meanwhile, as fate and parallel story construction would have it," and we head over to day 8 of an archaeological dig not far from the boys. Professor Nina Dowd records a note saying that she's now sure that the crater her team is excavating is the result of an extraterrestrial object's impact with the Earth. She's certain that today they'll find something big, and sure enough, one of her team calls her down to see a wheel, with a tire and everything, that they've uncovered, attached to something else that they haven't dug out yet. Nina says that the tire doesn't seem to be made of rubber, but something else. Murph, one one of her team members warns Nina not to touch it, but she does anyway, and there's a big flash of light and explosion. Murph tells the others to call the authorities. Yeah, I really wanted to talk about all the fourth wall breaks here. There are a lot in this issue particularly, and there's some later on too, but not nearly as many, and I do kind of miss it. The meanwhile, as Fate and Parallel story construction would have it, is genuinely so funny, and later there's a meanwhile on the next page, which I don't know, I just like that kind of stuff. I guess DC or the creative team didn't stick with that particular kind of tone for a reason, but I think bringing it back every once in a while would have been cool. The crater was of course made by the Super Cycle, which is from Galactica New Genesis, which we'll learn more about later in this series, but if you want to know, it's all very complicated Apocalypse Dark Side stuff that you can look up on the lore wiki. I'll save my thoughts on Nina Dowd for later, so we'll move on for now. Back in the cave, Robin, in response to Impulse's boredom, says that he thinks the team is doing fine so far. They've spent some time bonding, even had a sleepover in the JLA cave. It's too early to go out looking for trouble. Superboy says that's all well and good, but he, unlike the statue behind him, which is actually an inactive red tornado, doesn't want to sit around with Robin and Impulse waiting for someone to come knocking down their door for help. He has a lot of other options he could be pursuing instead. Robin says he'll take up monitor duty, presumably to see if they're needed anywhere. Meanwhile, Bart has found a can of spray paint and suggests redecorating the cave, to Robin's dismay. Before anyone can stop him, though, Bart has sprayed portraits of the three of them onto a wall and also graffitied Hanson Bites onto Red Tornado's chest. He's also tagged Superboy and Robin in the process, who are both angry with him, though Superboy says that Bart's lucky he can take off the paint with his tactile telekinesis. Superboy does agree that the place looks cooler now, but Robin reminds them that the JLA is only loaning them the space, and they shouldn't be disrespectful to another superhero team if they want to be one. Bart, pretending to surf on Red Tornado, suggests that, in that case, perhaps they shouldn't be a superhero team. Superboy agrees, pointing out that they don't have all that much in common with each other anyway, but then suddenly Red Tornado activates and suggests that they look at things from a Freudian psychoanalytic perspective, which scares Bart. Red Tornado goes on to say that the three of them actually fit the Freudian archetypes of id, ego, and superego. Impulse is the id, pure instinct with little fore or afterthought. Superboy is the ego, with a basic understanding of morality and ethics that was implanted into his brain by the scientists at Cadmus, with little first-hand experience of the world. Robin is the superego, having had a relatively normal upbringing compared to the other two, and a highly developed moral sense. He's the most natural leader, according to Red Tornado. Superboy objects to his assignation, insisting that he should be the superego, seeing as he's Superboy, and Robin should be Robin, the boy ego. Robin recognizes Red Tornado for who he is, and asks what he's doing there. Red Tornado explains that he thought he had lost his humanity, and saw no reason to continue his existence without such humanity. But the three of them have reawakened some sense of his human feelings simply by annoying him so badly. He particularly wants to smack Impulse, apparently. He sincerely thanks them for awakening him despite that. Then Bart notices the call for help from the archaeological site on the monitors, and they all take off to check it out. So, 90s American pop culture context corner. Hanson is an American pop rock band. They had the hit single Mbop in 1997, the year before this book came out. You definitely know the song if you were even semi-conscious in the early 2000s, and I guess it was sort of a cool, edgy, contrarian opinion to have, to be like, actually, Hanson sucks because they're popular and mainstream, which is why Bart spray paints Hanson Bites onto Red Tornado. We might have to do a 90s context corner every week, honestly. There are a lot of references in YJ, and I've already had to talk about The Postman and South Park, so maybe he'll make it a regular thing. Anyway, it's notable that Young Justice almost literally broke up over this very fundamental disagreement on conduct as a team before they could even be an actual team. They definitely need an anchor like Red Tornado to help them balance things and remain clear-eyed. The girls also definitely help with that later, particularly Cassie. Okay, the Freud stuff. Look, I see where they were going with this. It's not wrong per se. I can definitely see the arguments for Robin as superego and Impulse as id, but I'm really not convinced by Superboy's diagnosis as ego. Here's a piece of the Wikipedia page I'll just read quickly. The id is the unconscious portion of the psyche that operates on the pleasure principle and is the source of basic impulses and drives. It seeks immediate pleasure and gratification. The superego is the moral component of the psyche. The rational ego attempts to exact a balance between the impractical hedonism of the id and the equally impractical moralism of the superego. It is the part of the psyche that is usually reflected most directly in a person's actions. So, while individually Bart maps onto the id and Robin maps onto the superego, they really don't display the classic struggle between those two components of Freud's psychological theory in their interpersonal dynamic. Robin is annoyed by Impulse, sure, but I wouldn't really describe it as a tug of war between them. Impulse is basically perfectly happy to let Robin call the shots most of the time, and often implicitly trusts him in precarious situations. The actual struggle in Young Justice is often between Robin and Superboy. Superboy usually wants to solve problems with what feels right to him, which of course brings to mind the pleasure principle. Superboy wants to solve problems with brute force because it feels good to exert his physical power over others. I would actually argue that particularly in these early days, Impulse kind of ends up in the peacekeeper or ego position, or he at least splits the difference between their opinions often enough. I'd love to hear other people's opinions about this, so go ahead and send an ask to the Tumblr or email the pod. In the next scene, the boys in Red Tornado fly to the dig site, Bart running and Robin on Red Tornado's back. Robin asks Tornado how he knew all those things about them, and Red Tornado explains that he has detailed files on over 1,500 super beings that he's constantly updating. There are 19 on Hawkman alone, apparently. Superboy asks Impulse what the situation they're heading into is, and Impulse explains that McGuffin University sponsored an exploratory dig in a crater and some kind of artifact was discovered and affected one of the diggers. They arrive at the dig and two men in suits are trying to keep the press back from the site, being quite no-nonsense and aggressive. In response to CDTV's Ace Atchison asking who they are, the men introduce themselves as Special Agents Donald Fight and Ishido Mad. Agent Fight proceeds to shoot the camera Ace's cameraman is using. In the back, Superboy suggests Robin ask another man in a suit what's going on, and he does. The man says he's not FBI when Robin asks, but rather DEO. He says that Fight and Mad are running the investigation and suggests the boys stay away from them. Why? Because they're fighting mad. Impulse is not impressed and runs into the crater to find a strange blue cocoon of some kind next to the wheel that the archaeologist discovered before. When Agent Mad tries to shoot Impulse, Superboy blocks it and they get into it. Agent Fight tells Superboy to relax and shows the boys an accordion of government identifications, including DEO, FBI, CIA, Interpol, etc. Robin is in disbelief, but Agent Fight says, "We're from the All-Purpose Enforcement Squad, Multinational Cooperative Task Force. We have more clearance than God." Meanwhile, Bart sticks his head into the cocoon, making it explode. Superboy and Robin, alarmed, ask if he's okay, but Impulse says he's fine. Robin tells him that it was a stupid risk to take to stick his head in, and if any of them should be taking chances, it should be Superboy, who is unsure how to feel about that comment. From the cocoon, Nina Dowd has emerged, now calling herself Mighty Endowed. She apparently now has huge breasts, and the boys range from eager to confused about the possibility of fighting her. But before they get a chance, she falls over due to the weight of her chest. Robin suggests Fight and Mad give them clearance to check out the situation, considering the nature of it might be more in the superheroes' wheelhouses. Ace Atchison chimes in, mistaking them for the Teen Titans, which Superboy denies. Ace says, "Oh right, they're the Young Justice League of America." And Bart responds, "No, we're young, but just us." Ace says, "Oh okay, Young Justice." And Bart says, "No, Young Just Us." And Ace is like, "Right, Young Justice." And Bart's finally like, "Fine, whatever." Agent Fight gives them permission to go into the crater. Mad questions it, but Red Tornado points out that Fight is only using the boys as convenient cannon fodder in case there is significant danger in the crater. Bart, of course, doesn't need to be told twice, and the other two follow. Robin asks Superboy to get whatever is attached to the wheel out, and Superboy agrees, mentioning his TTK again, to Bart's annoyance. Superboy suggests that Bart get it out then, but Robin firmly tells Bart to stay put and Superboy to get the job done. Superboy is still unhappy about being bossed around by Robin, and they argue a bit, but Superboy does pull the wheel out, revealing that it was attached to a large, purple, futuristic vehicle of some kind. Superboy immediately calls dibs and dubs it the Super Cycle. Bart objects, but Robin says they're not going to take it anyway, while Superboy notes that the vehicle is strangely warm, despite having been buried underground for so long. Robin wonders why contact with the Super Cycle turned Nina into Mighty Endowed. At a horrible joke from Superboy about it being a booby trap, Robin drops his head onto the cycle and accidentally activates it. Impulse and Superboy try to get Robin out of it at his request, but some sort of force is holding him in the seat. They wonder what to do when the cycle tells them to hold on. Superboy intends to force the cycle to stay put with his TTK, but it takes off with all of them anyway. Okay, first of all, I would love to see Red Tornado's files on everyone. I bet they're very detailed and I would like to read them, please. Second of all, this is what I'm talking about with the fourth wall breaks. McGuffin University. Very silly. This is also the first appearance of newscaster H. Assenson. That is not his name. Ace Atchison with CDTV, who we'll be seeing quite a bit throughout this run, as well as Special Agents Fight and Mad. Love these two, very buddy cop comedy vibes, and I like them as representatives for DEO. They represent like the moral ambiguity of the organization pretty well, I think. And I believe Ishido Mad is supposed to be Japanese, but Mad is not a Japanese surname as far as I know. I could only find it as applied to people of Indian descent, where it's spelled that way, M-A-A-D, but I get that they did it for the bit. We finally got the origin of Young Just Us. If you somehow have been listening to this podcast and not known what the title was about, here it is. Love some wordplay. It is kind of wacko and out of character that Agent Fight would use the boys as cannon fodder, considering that we find out later he has a daughter of similar age, but maybe Peter David hadn't planned that out yet. I do love the joke of Superboy always bringing up his TTK, and then there's another fourth wall break where Bart is like, man, will you stop blabbering about your stupid power? You act like you're filling in someone who you just met. Enough already. The super cycle is very cool and I suppose needed because there are a few members of the team that can't fly, so convenient. The origin of it is very weird, like I mentioned before, but I will talk about it more when we get to New Genesis later. Alright, we have to talk about Mighty Endowed. Look, it sucks. It's very gross, and it's not very funny. And it stands out even more glaringly because there are currently 0 other female characters on page in this entire book, besides, Murph. The joke is that boobs too big, so she falls over. Man, come on. It does the bimbofication trope to, a respected female scientist, presumably, and the comic doesn't have anything interesting or even that makes sense to say about this transformation. When Robin wonders why the supercycle did this to her, it's yeah, that's a great question, Robin. Why did this happen? Listen, you don't need me to tell you that comics are riddled with misogyny and sexism. It's on the page for you to see, but I don't think the ubiquity of it excuses us as readers from calling it out when we see it. Obviously, this is just kind of a dumb joke, but I think, personally, it lowers the quality of the comic. It's stupid, and I would have loved to see them fight an actual villain in the first issue. There's a lot of telling instead of showing going on about, this is why they're a great team, and you kind of just have to take Red Tornado's word for it. And then they don't even get the chance to, take on a villain. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big deal, and I see why they avoided doing, a big villain fight in the very first issue, but I genuinely believe that this kind of stuff makes comics worse and writers should stop doing it. It's okay to be comedic and have situations that subvert expectations, but not like this, brother. Not like this. I do kind of appreciate the fact that Todd Knock didn't draw her actual chest. There's always smoke or something else obscuring her torso in the panels, so there's that. And I do think it's worth noting that this wouldn't have happened if Cassie, Secret, and Sissy were already in the group. Or if it had, it definitely would have been handled differently. Maybe Cassie would have even called Superboy out for being gross, but those are just my woke liberal fantasies, so... Oh, and also Booby Trap is diabolical. Jail. Jail for everyone involved in that. Let's move on. In the last scene, back on the ground, Agent Mad wonders what just happened, and Red Tornado claims that it's the effect of unleashing the id, superego, and ego. Ace Atchison is mildly offended by Red Tornado's graffiti because he likes Hanson, actually, and in the sky, the cycle is taking the boys who knows where, and the team seems finally united, at least in their panic, save Impulse, who is evidently having a pretty good time. And that's the end of the book. This isn't, the best Young Justice issue, certainly, but like I said, it's quite nostalgic because this is where everything begins. Again, I do think it would have been better to have them face an actual villain, but I get that we kind of just got that in JLA World Without Grown-Ups, which is why I think that book should have just been Young Justice issue 0, but I guess that DC was trying to get, JLA readers to read Young Justice, so... makes sense, I guess. But yeah, I definitely think that the humor is the strongest element of this particular issue, and all the art looks great too. I especially love the page where Red Tornado is forwarding them, ironically. Definitely let me know your guys' thoughts and feelings on the issue, either via the social media or the email. That's all YJU Podcast, all one word, across all platforms. All links will always be in the description or show notes. Make sure to subscribe to the pod wherever you're listening, and next week I will be covering issue 2 of Young Justice. So thank you for listening, and remember, it's not Young Justice, it's Young Just Us.